Okay, we're back. We're live for the 4 o'clock rock. I'm Jay Fidel. Next to me is Shawna Yang Ryan. She's an author and a professor of writing at UH Manoa. We are delighted to have you on the show, Shawna.
Thank you, Jay. I'm excited to be here.
So we're calling this Asia in Review because Shawna was introduced to us by our Asia in Review host, Bill Sharp, who is on his way to Taipei, where he's going to spend a year in a special overseas study program there. I'm going to call this show The Making of Green Island. I say making because I think writing is more than just writing. Writing is making, creating something. And the point is that Shawna just finished this book. It's a book about the U.S. and Taiwan. It's epic. That is, it started in 1947 and ends in the early 2000s, crossing several decades. And it's got everything in it. We'll learn some of those things today. But, you're an author, a novelist. This is not your first book. You had another book before. You had White Ghosts.
Water Ghosts.
Water Ghosts.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of get the trajectory of where you're going. Tell us about how you got interested in English and writing and novels and all that.
Okay, well, that's a big question. I think I got interested the way a lot of people do is through reading. I just loved reading when I was younger. And luckily I had a teacher in elementary school who encouraged us to create stories. And one day in 4th grade, she gave us an assignment, and I went home to fulfill this assignment, and I ended up writing this 11-page story that was unfinished. And I came back and I said, I can't turn in my homework because I need to keep writing this. And luckily she said that was okay. And I continued writing it the whole year. This is in 4th grade, so I wrote a novel that year. That was my first novel.
Out of the 11 pages.
Yes, I just
Wow.
wrote every day. And luckily my parents are pretty strict about letting us watch TV. So back then the TV had knobs, so my dad would actually take the knobs off the TV. So when we got home from school, we had to entertain ourselves, and so writing was a way for me to do that. So that's when the passion started, and I decided that I really wanted to be a writer.
Do you remember the teacher's name?
Oh my gosh.
I always feel that there's one teacher,
Yeah.
in your life who has more of an influence on you
Yeah.
than anyone else, and tends to, give you confidence and direction. And then if you follow that, your life is defined by this one connection,
I
this
know.
one teacher.
Yeah, and I can see her face, and I just can't think of her name right now.
It'll come.
Yes.
Anyway, okay, so how did you play that out? You wrote a novel in 4th grade. Not too many people have done that. And how did it play out after you discovered your passion?
Well, I kept writing all throughout elementary school and junior high, writing pretty consistently. And when I got to high school, I started to write less because it was interesting because the books that I was reading were more like Jackie Collins novels and Stephen King. And Stephen King is great. Like, I don't want to talk down about Stephen King at all. But I wasn't reading a lot of literature, to be honest. And so I wasn't feeling as inspired as I had been earlier. And then in high school, we read Toni Morrison's Beloved, which is amazing. And reading that, I was like, wow, this is what a book could be. And I got inspired again. So then when I went to college, my enthusiasm was renewed, and I ended up majoring in English and taking creative writing workshops, and from there went to graduate school.
Yeah. Where'd you go to school?
For undergraduate, I went to UC Berkeley, and then I did the master's program in creative writing at UC Davis.
Creative writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those subjects where you can work real hard, but it doesn't necessarily make you any money.
True. I know. Yes.
So after Berkeley, what happened then?
So after Berkeley, I went to Taiwan for a year as I was getting ready to apply to graduate school. And my mother's from Taiwan, so my grandparents still lived there, and I had aunts and uncles. I lived with my aunt there in Taichung. And that's where I came up with the idea for Green Island, actually. And it would be a few years before I actually started this novel, but it was in Taiwan that year, studying Mandarin, that I took a day trip to Taipei. And actually, I just wanted to go to Taipei because I wanted to have a bagel and read an American newspaper. And I got those things, and I was wandering around the city, and I came upon this museum, the 228 Memorial Museum.
What is that?
And so It was recently opened, and it was a very small museum. It's since been renovated and is really lovely, but it's a museum memorializing this massacre that took place in 1947 in Taiwan. After the Chinese nationalists came, after the end of World War II, they came to Taiwan, and they were still fighting the communists in China. So they were using, Taiwan had been built up as a model colony for Japan under Japanese colonialism. The Japanese left, the nationalists came in, and they found this wealth on this island. So they're using all these resources to fight the communists. And the standard of living was going down, inflation was going up, there were food shortages, and people in Taiwan were becoming very unhappy. So one evening, there was a widow selling black market cigarettes at the side of the road, and some military police came up to her and they tried to confiscate her cigarettes. But they were Chinese and she was Taiwanese, and they didn't speak the same language. She didn't really understand what was going on. They ended up getting into a fight. They ended up beating her with their pistol. A crowd gathered, and the military police panicked, and they shot into the crowd and killed a bystander.
Oh.
And so this was sort of what set off. It was like that one moment that just sets everything else off. So then there were protests and riots about it the next day, of course, and people were really unhappy. They wanted the military police to be brought to justice. It seemed to be emblematic of all the tensions that were happening in this clash between the Taiwanese and nationalist Chinese. And so the nationalist Chinese came down very hard on the Taiwanese protesters.
Kai-shek was
Yes,
there.
Chiang Kai-shek. He sent a telegram, saying you got to stop this. So they sent over troops. Well, it's interesting, if I could backtrack a little, is that they said, okay, how can we resolve this issue? Let's have a community meeting. And they invited community leaders to come and tell them what they wanted to happen to resolve this conflict between the Taiwanese and Chinese. And they said, well, we want representation, we want more democracy, you're an ally of the United States. We thought that after leaving Japanese colonialism that we would have this opportunity to have some more representation. So the nationalist Chinese listened to this, but at the same time, the troops were on their way over to suppress these protests. And so these ships came, they unloaded the troops. The reports are that there was indiscriminate shooting as soon as they disembarked. The island was put under martial law. And then there was a systematic rooting out of anybody who had been involved in the protests or potentially could be some sort of Taiwanese leader. And so that's what led to the 228 massacre, because this happened in February, and the initial incident was on February 28th. So in the space of less than a month, between 10 and 20,000 people were murdered or disappeared.
It wasn't just one day, it was a continuing massacre.
Right.
That's awful.
Yeah, and so it is awful. So there was this memorial museum that I had come upon and where I discovered this story. And
that happened on Green Island, is that why?
it happened in Taiwan, in all parts of Taiwan. It started in Taipei, but it spread to other cities. And Green Island was actually where there was a prison. So some of the people that they arrested, if they didn't murder them immediately, they sent them to Green Island, to this prison.
Where they treated them badly.
Yes, yeah. And so that's what happened the year after I graduated, is I discovered this story and decided that I wanted to someday write a book about it.
Yeah, it's funny how stories live inside you and they grow.
Right.
And you think about them and you
Right.
roll them around and ultimately they can blossom in this way
Right.
For
Yeah.
you. So how long did this roll around in your mind before you actually put pen to paper?
Yeah, well, I wrote another novel in the meantime, Water Ghosts.
Yeah.
So that was in 1999 when I first discovered this story, and I returned to graduate school, and my master's thesis was Water Ghosts. And then in 2002, I applied for a Fulbright to return to Taiwan, proposing that I try to write this book about the 228 massacre.
Okay, let's stop for a minute
Okay.
on Water Ghosts.
Sure.
Okay, Water Ghosts was your thesis at Berkeley.
At Davis.
At Davis.
Yeah.
And so what was it about? And was it also likewise inspired by your time in Taiwan?
This Water Ghost was actually set in California, but it's sort of a similar origin. It's like some story that caught my attention for being surprisingly unusual or unknown, and so I wanted to explore it. And so Water Ghosts is set in 1928. It's set in this all-Chinese town called Locke in the Sacramento Delta. And this town was really unusual for a number of reasons. So it was mostly populated by Chinese farm laborers, but there, of course, were a number of brothels, and the brothels were staffed only by white women. They didn't allow Chinese women to work there. Yeah, so that was interesting. And I wanted to know why, and I also wanted to know why there didn't seem to be much historical fiction about Chinese women in America. So exploring that, I learned about the immigration laws that prevented the immigration of Chinese women. And so I wrote a story about this situation of a man who comes from China to the United States, lives in this town, has left his wife behind, is having an affair with a woman in the brothel, and then his wife shows up one day and she's not very happy, and everything that ensues after that.
So the operative word, historical fiction.
Yeah.
That's what you did. Springing out of, some real thing, and then you did it in school, but it, like the 11 pages, it turned into a novel.
True. Yeah. And I think the historical fiction, though, it's not just coming out of, well, it is coming out of some facts, but I also think of it as sort of a counter narrative to the dominant narrative. So telling the Water Ghost story is to tell the story of Chinese women in America and maybe writing them into that history where there was an absence. And I think with Green Island, it's a way to tell the story of Taiwan that counters the story of Taiwan we usually hear in American media, which is that Taiwan is a part of China or that there's one China. I think it's a way to offer a different view on that.
Yeah, so, there's always a message.
Yeah.
And you want to deliver that, and somehow it adds credibility when you're dealing with fact, and you make the fact into historical fiction.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes they say, fiction is stranger than fact.
Yeah.
And maybe more compelling, actually. But it remains that you're using fact to start and that you're sending a message, which is very interesting. So what kind of experience did you have in doing Water Ghosts? This was your first, aside from the 11 pages, how was it? How long did it take you? What kind of effort did you have to put in? How satisfied were you with that book?
It was very exciting to write because it was my first real novel. And it took me about 2 years. I wrote it during the span of my master's degree, and then after I graduated, I spent some time revising it and sending it out. But the exciting thing is that I actually got to go live in Locke for a month.
Really?
And Locke has 2 streets. It had 80 people living there. It looks like the set of a Western, and in fact, sometimes it is used as a movie set or a commercial set. The buildings are tilting. They were built in the early 1900s, and the construction was not that great. So in some buildings, they're actually like tension wires holding the face up so it doesn't collapse.
Like the set of a movie.
Yes, exactly. And so I lived in a former gambling house, upstairs of a former gambling house, and that building was tilted too, because every week, at the end of the week, I'd have to slide my sleeping mat back to the middle of the room because it was drifting.
That's dealing with the reality.
Yeah.
In person. Okay, so and the writing process, how was that for you? Was it easy? I guess you'd already discovered you loved literature and you loved the language and writing and all. So did it just flow? Did you just find your voice right away and write it?
That's a good question. It was easier. I would say it was easier because I didn't know what I was doing. Because everything seemed possible. The first book was really exhilarating, and Green Island was much more of a struggle. I think because I had already gone through it once, I kind of knew what to expect, and it just seemed a lot more difficult. But the first book was really fun. I just worked on it all the time. I was obsessed with it. It was the first thing I did when I got up in the morning. It was just a super exciting time.
Did it get published?
It did, yes. It was published first by a small press called Leon Literary Arts, based in Berkeley. That was in 2007. And then it was reviewed on this blog, and an agent saw the review and contacted me and ended up representing me, and he sold the book to Penguin Press, which reissued it in 2009.
That's great.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into Green Island. We're going to talk about how that bubbled up inside you and how you pursued your dream of writing that novel and what's in there, to the extent you'll tell us. Okay? That's Shawna Yang Ryan. We're talking about the making of Green Island. We'll be right back.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host of Global Connections here at ThinkTech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. My name is Anu Hittel, and I host the show called Climate Change Beyond Outrage. We go beyond outrage to find solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. I hope you will join me here every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. We broadcast live from thinktechhawaii.com. Aloha and bye-bye.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidel, and I'm with Shawna Yang Ryan. She's an author and also an English professor, a writing professor at UH Manoa. And so you went back after Water Ghosts. You went back to Taiwan again.
Yes, I went back on the Fulbright in 2002.
The Fulbright. And that was 1 year, 2 years?
It was a 10-month Fulbright, but I stayed for 3 years. Not on the Fulbright, though.
This time you really learned about Taiwan.
Yes, yeah. They couldn't
And
get
you
rid
had
of
freedom
me.
to go anywhere and do anything and study anything. Yeah.
Right, right.
So we have a tweet here. Somebody wants to know what's the best local street food in Taiwan.
Okay.
You must have learned that during the Fulbright, eh?
Yeah. Well, one of the best places to find it is at a night market, and Taiwan is famous for their night markets, and their biggest night market is the Shilin Night Market in Taipei. Best street food is personal preference. I personally really like stinky tofu, which is not everybody's
Stinky tofu?
cup of tea. Yes. Sometimes you're walking down the street in Taiwan and you're like, what is that smell? It's deep fried fermented tofu, but it tastes a lot better than it smells. It's something to try.
The mark of really good food. So you lived there and you got down in it. Now you were really studying Taiwan
Yes.
in all the depth. And so what started in, 1999 with the idea about Green Island, now you could really flesh out Taiwan as a setting, as a venue for the novel.
Right.
Was it then, while you were in Taiwan during the Fulbright, that you started writing Green Island?
That's when I started it, yeah.
Okay.
So the proposal for the grant was to write this book, Green Island, but my proposal was so different from what the book ended up being. It was completely set in 1947 at that point, and my main character was creating propaganda films for the Chinese nationalists, and that character has been eliminated. So this book is completely different from that one, but that's where it started.
So that's interesting. So we'll talk about the writing process for the book. You started out with one idea, with one direction, and then things happened in the course of your travels, your examination of Taiwan, to make you change it completely. What was that metamorphosis like?
Right. It was long. I went through so many versions of this book, to be honest.
You said you struggled with it.
I really struggled with it, so I started with that version. I moved it around in time. I had another version set in the 1960s. I had another version that was like a multi-character, multifaceted. They're all looking on one point from their personal points of view, looking at one event. And then I finally have this one, which is narrated by a first-person narrator who is the youngest daughter of a man who is arrested.
All these characters are fictional.
Yes, all the characters are fictional. And it was just so hard because as I was learning more about Taiwan's history, I kept finding better ways to talk about it. So I think the initial proposal was from a really shallow understanding of Taiwan's history, and as it became more nuanced, I realized there were more and more things I had to cover. So I had to find different stories that would allow me to cover that.
Cover it, meaning cover Taiwan history. present Taiwan to the world, is some of the essence of Taiwan since World War II, essentially. Yeah.
I would say the nuances of Taiwan, of Taiwan's history.
People didn't really know, didn't understand. It's life in Taiwan. It's life at what, a family level, or is it greater than that?
It's family and political, and I think that was the most difficult thing to find language for. The family part, I mean, what is that saying about all happy families are the same, right? But unhappy families are different in their own way. Well, I mean, so it's relatively easy to write about a family. I think it was much harder to contextualize it within the political landscape of Taiwan, because there are three competing narratives about Taiwan. Taiwan's narrative, the United States narrative, and China's narrative about Taiwan. And trying to triangulate those, address those narratives while presenting a narrative that was authentic was really difficult.
It's really ambitious. I mean, these are huge things you're talking about. These relationships are historic relationships, kaleidoscopic.
Yes.
And so much rides on such great feeling and passion. I mean, I remember I went to some conference, and there was a woman, somebody called on a woman who was Taiwanese to talk about Taiwan, and she was so passionate about it. And she was so, may I say, angry with the Chinese.
Yeah.
It was really important to her to get that message out. And you saw all of that when you were there. You saw that passion, that animosity. I don't know if that's the right word for it.
I don't know if I'd use the word animosity. I think there's a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
Taiwan only has official relations with 21 states, 21 countries. So, they've been sort of shunned on the global...
Because of China's position on things.
Right, and so I think there's a lot of frustration that their story is so eclipsed by China's version of events, and I think that's where some of that passion comes from, is being ignored.
So you want to cover that.
Right.
And even at the very beginning of the Green Island experience, the making of Green Island, you had a message in mind. I'm guessing now, but you have to clarify for me. The message was you wanted the world to know what this was all like, how this had evolved since the war, the feeling about China, the feeling about the U.S., the feeling about where Taiwan has been shunned in part, but also very successful in part.
Right, one of the Asian tigers.
Yeah.
And part of that too is when I tell people that my mom is from Taiwan or I've just come back from Taiwan, I have had people respond on more than one occasion, multiple occasions, I love Thai food. Or they recommend a Thai restaurant, and I'm like, oh, okay, no, Taiwan, not Thailand. So, I mean, that is just like the most simple example of how Taiwan is just not on people's radar.
Yeah. So this is to put it on people's radar.
Yes.
But you chose a novel, and you created a first-person character, and he goes through, or she, I guess it's a he.
She. It's a she.
Of course. She goes through, an epical experience. So can you tell us who she is? Like a Mr. Potato Man kind of thing. What is her makeup? What is her position in life? What is her personality?
Well, the narrator is born on the night that the protests start, the 1947 protests, right before the massacre. So her father is not that politically active, but he goes to one of those community meetings that I mentioned earlier, where he goes to talk about why Taiwan should have more representation and be more democratic. And so that puts him on the radar of the Chinese nationalists. So when they sweep through to wipe out any of the opponents, they come and arrest him. And so that happens 2 weeks after she's born. And her mother becomes a single mother with 4 children. They move into her grandparents' house, and it kind of traces their struggle that a lot of Taiwanese families went through, dealing with this sudden situation of a missing parent, that they don't know what happened to him, and living under this oppressive rule of Kai-shek, who was essentially a dictator, and living under martial law, and following them through the decades as they make a life in that situation.
I hear the sound of the massacre, the 228 massacre in all of this. This is an influence on you,
right,
that somehow is reflected in the book, no?
Right, and it was also a defining moment, in a really important moment in Taiwan's history, Taiwan's modern history, because I think it's important to understand the optimism that people had when the Chinese nationalists came. So again, they were under Japanese colonialism for 50 years. And during World War II, Japan started this Japanization movement where they said, you got to learn Japanese, you should change your names, Japanese names, and you have to fight for the Japanese army. So they were forced into these positions. They had to pay, I think people called it a blood tax, to prove that they were really, really supported Japan. And so, of course, they didn't like living under colonialism. So when they left, they thought, oh, this is our opportunity. Maybe the Chinese will come in and be better leaders.
So at first they welcomed them.
Yes, there are stories that they lined the ports when the first Chinese arrived, holding up nationalist flags and greeting them, and then they were so disappointed to find out the reality. So it was like this optimism followed by this deep disappointment. Yeah.
So then you track your narrator through decades of life, living in Taiwan and dealing with the historical changes that were going on.
So it follows her, and then there is a part set in the 1970s when the Americans are in Taiwan, based there to fight in Vietnam, and she meets her husband, who is an overseas student. He's a Taiwanese who has gone over to America to study graduate school. He comes back and he meets her, and they get married, and then she moves to California. The thing about Chiang Kai-shek's dictatorship is that he had such an iron grip on Taiwan that they had spies everywhere. So they had what were called student spies in the United States watching their overseas graduate students.
This was not generally known, was it?
No.
This is something you found out when you researched the history of it.
Right.
And that's, it's funny. I mean, I mentioned Chiang Kai-shek at the outset in the recollection that, yes, he was strong. Yes, Mao beat him, but he represented, an important Chinese viewpoint. And group of people, and I guess a lot of people see him as a strong leader, but they don't see him as a despot or a tyrannical leader,
Exactly.
or as someone who sends spies to California to check up.
Right.
This is not so good, and it changes my view. I wasn't aware it changes my view of Chiang Kai-shek.
Well, I mean, he had great PR. He's handsome, he had a wonderful smile, he had a beautiful wife who spoke English and was educated in the United States. He was our ally. Time magazine named him and his wife International Man and Woman of the Year in
Madam
1937.
Chiang Kai-shek,
yes.
I remember.
Yeah,
she was a pretty woman.
She was so glamorous, so it's hard to see him that way. But it's true, they sent the spies to the United States, and there is an infamous story of a man in Daly City, California, outside of San Francisco, who was writing a book about Chiang Kai-shek's son, and people are not happy about it. The KMT, the Chinese nationalists, weren't happy, and they sent over some thugs to assassinate him on American soil.
Did they?
And they did.
This is reminiscent. Lee Wai-do, who is part of the Chinese old establishment here in Hawaii, a lawyer, a city council member for a long time, active in many things, told me on that very chair of spies from the old China back when, I guess it was during the rebellion in the early 1900s. Was that the Boxer Rebellion? There was some rebellion going on in China about how there were Hawaii people, Chinese people, who sent their sons and their husbands to China to fight in that rebellion. And I guess they were fighting against the monarchy at the time. And China was sending spies to Hawaii to do bad things to the families.
Oh.
And they were trying to find out what families were sending people or money back to China to fight against the monarchy. Very interesting. This happened here. This was in the early part of the 19th century, and it was very threatening and frightening to the Chinese community here. I didn't know about that. This is very interesting that the same thing would have existed in your book, in Spies in California.
Right, and that was the 1980s.
Much scarier yet, isn't it? Yeah. Well, we're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from those places now, so it's easy to send spies. And you cover this in the book.
Yes.
You have
Yes.
intrigue, you have
do.
mystery, you have
Yeah.
espionage and spies and whatnot. So you really made something of it, and it will leave a big impression on the reader to find out about these things that he didn't know, and to see how your characters unfold. And when we come back from this break, I'm going to ask you how they do unfold and what happens, to the extent that you'll tell
Okay.
me. I know you're not going to tell me everything.
No spoilers.
Okay, that's Shawna Yang Ryan. We're talking about the making of Green Island. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to Think Tech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Okay, we're back, we're live. It's getting more interesting now. More interesting yet. Okay, with Shawna Yang Ryan. And so now we know that there are spies coming back from Taiwan as recently as the 1980s, checking up on people who are living in California, in the United States, and who in fact assassinated a Taiwanese man
Who was a U.S.
who
citizen.
was a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil.
Right.
Did this hit the newspaper?
It did. It did. It did make waves, and politicians did get involved. And for whatever reason, like many stories of history, things that were very big at the time sort of fade away. So I don't think it's as well known. But there's a great book about it called Fires of the Dragon, and a nonfiction book that really digs into that whole story and the repercussions.
Yeah, but you're interested in it, enticed by it, by the drama of it, I think, and you included this in your novel, yeah.
Yes, without giving away too much, there is an aspect of that. I do deal with the student spies and this idea that another country could do something like that on U.S. soil and not suffer huge repercussions because of it. I mean, there were repercussions, but the U.S. had already severed its relations with Taiwan at that point, so what could they really do? It's just fascinating to me, and I think, too, it speaks to how much influence Chiang Kai-shek had, even though Chiang Kai-shek had already passed away at that point, because of the U.S.'s fear of China and communism. They were willing to put up with Chiang Kai-shek's dictatorship and this 38-year period of martial law in Taiwan because he was like their barrier against communism, right? He was standing between them and Chinese communism, and so they were willing to sacrifice the people of Taiwan for that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're talking about diplomacy being manipulated
Right.
by, I guess, the need to support him for American, diplomatic goals. But the fact is that they might not have been supporting a very good guy.
Right.
So how do you cover that? Can you give us a little précis about how you covered that and how you wove that in?
I think the best way to do that in a novel is to center it in a character that you care about, right? And so my main character becomes swept up in events like these. Because her father was arrested during 228, she is already involved in Taiwanese politics because of that, because her father has been sent to Green Island. And she can't shake that legacy. She knows her father had to pay a price for his political involvement, and she tries her best to not get involved, but her husband is very politically active, and because of his activities on U.S. soil as a graduate student at UC Berkeley and then as a professor at UC Berkeley, she's approached by these spies in the U.S. and asked to test her loyalties.
Wow. So, what we have here is a study of the political climate, both internally and externally, I suppose. Call this Taiwan foreign policy. In Taiwan over a long period. So you had to know a lot to be able to wrap around all that. Did you study Taiwan political history from 1947 on forward?
I did. I did a lot of research for this. And also, like I said, because it's grounded in the story of one family, I also spoke to a lot of people. So I did a mix of that kind of political research and historical research, which was really interesting, but also I was really interested in how do those big ideas actually manifest themselves in people's day-to-day lives. So I spoke to Taiwanese, I did interviews while I was there, and then I spoke to Taiwanese Americans, many of whom had come to the US as grad students and told me about the spies, many of whom who had been blacklisted and forbidden from returning to Taiwan for a period. So I wanted to know, what does that look like in their everyday lives, that kind of political oppression?
Yeah, and how it changes the way they conduct themselves on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So you really get into character development, I guess.
Yeah.
If you do an epic story, people change. I am sure you address that. And here they change not only because people change in general, but because their origins, their place of origin was changing.
Right,
and it has changed.
Yeah, and also this big question that I think we all face is the choice between complicity or resistance. I think in many different ways, and today, so many different situations. How much do you risk to fight for your rights, or do you step back so that you can have a peaceful, easygoing life, knowing that you're going to be somewhat oppressed because of it, but at least you're not making trouble? Like, do you not make trouble, or do you make trouble? Do you create those problems for your family to fight for an ideal, or do you just go about your business? And that's something that the character has to deal with.
Well, there's a Broadway play that effectively originated here in Hawaii, called Allegiance. Allegiance is about the Heart Mountain detention camp during World War II in the West. And I can't remember the state, I think it was Wyoming, Montana, one of those, and in nowhere. And it's about a family where half the family wants to resist and complain and protest against the detention, and the other half of the family wants to show loyalty to the United States and join the army and otherwise, support whatever the United States was doing. And it actually breaks the family up. This is also an epical story. It's on Broadway right now, quite successful.
It sounds amazing.
It's an epical story of that same family from the time they were incarcerated in the 40s till now.
Right.
And how it broke them up so profoundly
Yeah.
that they never, ever got back together
Yeah.
again. It's very, an Asian family, that's really hard to believe, that a family can be broken up by a political issue and their own positions on that issue so that they never talk to each other again. And I sense there's something in here in your book about that, where they don't agree and they never can quite, is this true?
I think there's a little more reconciliation in my
Good.
story.
Well, reconciliation is always
I
good.
wanted to end on a somewhat optimistic note.
Okay.
But I think that things like that definitely have generational repercussions. I mean, something like that changes the dynamic, and it can be really hard to recover from. And I think, too, that children pick up on that, even subconsciously, in sort of reflexive ways, in the way that even like somebody might carry their body or their reactions to things, and children pick up on that, and they don't really know the origins of it, but they carry it on. So I think things get carried on. Those kind of traumas get carried on, even subconsciously, throughout generations.
Yeah. So, and it's like DNA that changes. I forget the
Yes,
scientific
epigenetics. Yeah, exactly.
Epigenetics.
Yeah.
That you have the DNA, but it can change, and if
Exactly.
what happens to you really affects you going forward culturally.
Right.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. Well, this actually reminds me of all those East-West kinds of stories. I mean, it goes back to the story of Madame Butterfly. It goes to Miss Saigon. It goes to great literature, really, about how the East and the West have integrated or not over the past 150, 200 years. And you're talking about flying back and forth. You're talking about taking one culture, putting it in another. It's the development of this part of the world, really, and it's unique, I think, to this part of the world. And your story falls in line with some of those notions of East meeting West, the trauma you have, the pain, and ultimately the reconciliation. So it's bigger, than just the one family. It's bigger even than Taiwan. It's Asia, the United States, and what has happened to the world in all these years. So, wow.
And that Asia and the United States are not so far apart.
No, they're not, and they're
Yes.
closer still. But we pay a price. I mean, Asia has paid a price, and the U.S. has paid a price to bring things together. So what does it tell us about, the relationship now? I mean, where do you take the relationship now? Is the U.S. less likely to react in the modest way it reacted to this assassination? Is Taiwan more or less likely to try assassination again for people that that don't like what's going on? And where does it put China? I mean, China is always the looming 800-pounder in all of this.
Right.
So where do you take us in your novel for the relationships of those three places?
Well, it continues to be complicated. The book ends in 2003, and by that time, Taiwan is a democracy. Martial law ended in 1987. There were open elections. There was just an election last month in which a progressive female candidate won. She's going to be president by 56% of the vote, which is really amazing. And so that's why I wanted to end on a more optimistic note, is that Taiwan has come so far and become this amazing country. And yet it doesn't have official relations with the United States. The United States does not recognize it as a country. But last year, the United States did sell $1.8 billion worth of arms to Taiwan. So it's still thinking of Taiwan as the barrier against China. China still insists that Taiwan is a part of China, and don't seem to be letting up on that. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to this new president, who she's been very political and careful not to say, Taiwan should be independent. I think she's smarter than that, but she does not believe that Taiwan is a part of China.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed, and I wonder if this is in your thinking or in your book, is that on a business basis, Taiwan and China have established lots of business relationships, all since 1990 maybe, or maybe the year 2000 even. Businessmen from Taiwan go to China regularly, speak the same Mandarin language, and China comes to Taiwan regularly. It's almost like they're kissing cousins, except they're not. And there's a lot of resentment there, at least on the Taiwan side, and I suppose on the China side. So how do you deal with that? Are we on the way to a reconciliation there too? Do you ever, provide a message on that?
Well, I'm not sure, and economics are one thing and politics are another, and sometimes they don't necessarily mesh.
Guess
And
not.
there are a lot of Chinese tourists who come to Taiwan now, and people say that the best argument for democracy is just to have Chinese tourists come to Taiwan and see what an Asian democracy looks like. I'm sorry, what was the last part of your question?
Is there a reconciliation possible?
Oh.
I mean, how do you feel they feel?
Right. I'm not sure that reconciliation will happen the way people imagine that it will, or the kind of dialogue they're having about it now. For me, the best reconciliation would be for Taiwan to determine their own future, whatever they choose to determine. I think self-determination is the key word.
So radioactive, though, because if the U.S., after all these years, recognized Taiwan, even though it has de facto recognized Taiwan,
Right.
and it's an ally of
Right.
Taiwan, but if it did something like that, China would see that as a poke in the eye. It would be very, very angry. So this isn't going to happen anytime soon. Yeah.
Maybe not,
Yeah.
but in the period of my book, I think democracy would have been unimaginable, and now it is a fact. So things can happen.
Did you examine, either yourself or in the book, what factors led to this remarkable emergence of democracy in Taiwan in the 80s?
I don't go into it too much, but I think cultures change and new generations change and new people get into office and thinking shifts. It just takes a while to to turn things.
So, Shawna, you said that you went through several ideas and drafts and directions and scenarios in the book. Are you happy with the one you finally settled on?
I am, yes. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to share this story with people, and I hope that it'll put Taiwan onto the radar and help them think about Taiwan in a new way.
So this is a book that's in greater depth, than Water Ghosts. A book that reflects more time and effort, more sensitivity to the historical background you're talking about. Yeah.
Right.
And this is a book where I can get more out of it. I suppose if I read this book, I will learn a lot about Taiwanese politics and Taiwanese society and the relationship of people who came from Taiwan to the U.S. I'll understand that a lot better.
I hope so.
Yeah. Now you're going to be talking about this book. You've published this with Knopf. That's Serious Publisher. Did I say that right? Knopf.
Knopf, yeah.
Knopf. It's just coming out now.
February 23rd.
And I can buy it on Amazon.
Yes, or even better, at your local bookstore.
Local bookstore, better, yeah. February 23rd. Well, we got a scoop then, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're going to be speaking about it in a couple of places. You're going to be speaking about at Revolution Books on March 13th. It comes, and you'll be signing books then.
Yes, I will be signing books.
Okay, and then you're going to be at the Book and Film Festival. What is it? The Honolulu Book and
Music Festival
in May, and you'll be presenting then too.
Yep.
So we wish you well on this. A great effort, a great book, an historical. I love historical novels, really. And I wonder in your mind, what follows? Where are you making your next trip? And what ideas are gelling right now for you? If you can tell me without killing me.
Right. I think it'll be historical, big surprise, and I'm interested in water. So I'll just say that.
Okay, all right. Well, there's plenty of things about that. We talk about that all the time. And what about school? You're teaching an undergraduate or graduate program in creative writing?
I'm teaching both undergraduate and graduate creative writing at UH Manila.
What do you say to your students about writing novels? What do you say to them about that? Do you encourage them to do that?
I do, and I think one big piece of advice I give them is to look and always be looking and always be paying attention.
I mean, everything in their lives, so they can find an idea that they can marry and then take it and make it part of their lives.
Just
and
watch the
our
world.
lives. Yeah, watch the world. You know, a funny thing is that these books are really educational. And this is an educational book for sure. And so tell us in your words, tell that camera over there, that one, number 2.
Okay.
What you intend people should learn from this book, what you intend the message they should take from this book, and why they should look at it in order to improve their own, understanding of the world.
Well, I think whether or not they're interested in Taiwan, people can read this book and think about their own values and choices in life, and ask themselves the question: if they were in this character situation, what would they do? How far would they go to save the people that they love?
Yeah, it's about choices.
It is.
This is very important. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shawna.
Thank you so much.
Shawna Yang Ryan, author, novelist, published person. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's the book, Green Island, Shawna Yang Ryan.